Hey Aries, hope you're doing well. This is going to be a reading for Aries Sun, Moon, Rising, Venus, and North Node. Take what resonates and leave the rest. And thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate every like, every comment, and every bit of support you bring to this channel. Okay, I have to say the energy showing up here already feels different. It feels like you're standing at the edge of something significant. There is this feeling that a chapter is quietly closing while another one is beginning to open, and honestly, Aries, the cards coming out here don't feel small at all. They feel like the kind of energy that changes the way someone sees themselves. So let's get into your reading. The first card that catches my attention is the Emperor. And, Aries, the moment this card landed on the table, everything got very quiet. You know how sometimes life becomes so loud that you can't even hear your own thoughts anymore? This doesn't feel like that. This feels like someone who has been through enough experiences to stop chasing every distraction that passes by. There is something about your energy right now that feels more grounded than before. Not because everything has been easy. Honestly, it feels like the opposite. It feels like some of you have been carrying responsibilities that nobody really knows about. You've been figuring things out behind closed doors. You've been making difficult decisions when nobody was watching. You've been learning lessons that didn't come with applause. And now the Emperor is sitting here as if it's reflecting a version of yourself that has been slowly taking shape for a very long time. What's interesting is that right next to it, I have Judgment. Okay, this is where things start getting really interesting. Because I don't feel like this is only about external changes. I feel like this is about awareness. It's almost like you're beginning to see something differently. Maybe it's yourself. Maybe it's a situation you've been carrying for months. Maybe it's a goal that once felt impossible. But whatever it is, there is this sense of clarity rising to the surface. And I keep hearing the words, I don't think the same way anymore. That's what this energy feels like. Some of you may be looking back at old versions of yourself and realizing just how much you've changed. Not overnight, not suddenly, but through hundreds of small moments that slowly transformed you, because then we have death showing up. And whenever this card appears in a reading like this, I always pay attention. Not because it feels dramatic. Actually, it feels very natural here. It's almost like something has reached the end of its purpose. A mindset, a fear, a habit, a version of yourself that carried you through one season of life but doesn't seem to fit where you're headed now. I keep getting this image of someone standing in front of a door they've already outgrown. The door isn't locked. The problem is they keep looking back instead of turning the handle. And yet, Aries, something tells me that's beginning to change. Because the Emperor keeps staring forward. Judgment keeps pulling the energy upward, and death keeps clearing space. There is movement happening here, slowly, quietly, but definitely happening. I also have to say that some of you may have been feeling disconnected from your own excitement recently. Almost like you've been functioning, surviving, handling responsibilities, but not necessarily feeling inspired. And then this next card arrives, Ace of Wands. Okay, now the energy shifts. Now I understand why this reading felt so different from the beginning. Because this Ace of Wands doesn't feel random. It feels like a spark returning, not a reckless spark, not an impulsive spark. This feels like motivation that comes from experience. The kind of motivation that appears after someone has learned what matters and what doesn't. I keep feeling like some of you are starting to reconnect with parts of yourselves that have been quiet for a while. Dreams, ideas, plans, creative projects, goals, even confidence. It's like something inside you is waking up and saying, maybe I'm not finished. And honestly, that feels powerful. Because the cards aren't showing someone trying to become somebody else. They're showing someone becoming more of who they already are. That is a very different kind of transformation. I keep looking at the Emperor and Ace of Wands together. And what I find fascinating is that one carries experience while the other carries possibility. One feels established, the other feels new. One says, look how far you've come. The other says, look how much is still available. And Aries, I think that's where this reading begins, not with an ending, not with a loss, but with the realization that something inside you has been preparing for a completely different chapter. The strange part is that I don't think the biggest shift is happening outside of you first. I think it's happening within you. And once that changes, everything else starts responding differently. Because as I continue pulling cards, I'm seeing something that makes this entire story even more interesting. Because what I'm seeing here feels like the moment someone realizes that the thing standing in front of them was never as powerful as they thought it was. Okay, the tower just landed on top of the spread. And honestly, Aries, this doesn't feel chaotic. I know that's probably a strange thing to say when the tower shows up, but that's exactly what I'm getting. This feels more like a realization that changes everything. You know when you've spent so much time believing something that eventually it starts feeling like a fact? Maybe it was a fear. Maybe it was a limitation. Maybe it was a story someone told you years ago. Maybe it was a version of yourself that you kept carrying simply because it became familiar. And suddenly something happens. Not necessarily a dramatic event. Not necessarily a huge conversation. Just one moment of clarity. One moment where you look at something and think, wait a second. Why am I still carrying this? That's what this energy feels like. I keep seeing someone standing in a room they've outgrown. The furniture is the same. The walls are the same. The memories are the same. But the person standing in that room is completely different now. And for some reason, Aries, I feel like you're beginning to notice that. Not everyone notices their own growth immediately. Sometimes growth happens quietly. It hides inside difficult decisions, inside boundaries, inside disappointments, inside the moments when nobody else is around. But eventually, there comes a point where the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, and that's where strength appears. I have to say something. This card feels very different from what people usually expect, because the energy I'm getting isn't loud. It's not aggressive. It's not somebody trying to prove how strong they are. Actually, it's the opposite. This feels like somebody who no longer needs to prove anything. There is a calmness here, a steadiness, a confidence that doesn't need an audience. I almost feel like there was a time when certain people could easily shake your confidence. Certain opinions mattered more than they should have. Certain situations carried power over your emotions. But strength keeps showing me someone who is becoming much harder to move. Not because they stop caring, but because they finally understand their value. That's different. Very different. And what's fascinating is that the moment strength settles into the reading, the star appears. Okay, this is where the energy starts feeling lighter. It's almost like the air changes. The pressure begins lifting. The heaviness starts fading. And I keep hearing this phrase, what if things are actually opening instead of closing? Because for some of you, there has been so much focus on what didn't work, so much focus on what was delayed, so much focus on what felt unavailable. But the star isn't looking backward. It's looking towards something else. Something that hasn't fully appeared yet. And that's why this feels important. Because I don't think this shift begins with circumstances. I think it begins with perspective. The moment perspective changes, everything else starts rearranging itself. You may even notice yourself responding differently to situations that used to trigger you. People who once occupied your thoughts all day suddenly don't have the same influence. Conversations that would have drained your energy no longer feel worth carrying. Old disappointments begin losing their emotional weight. And honestly, that can feel strange at first, because whenever we release an old version of ourselves, there is often a brief period where everything feels unfamiliar. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like learning how to walk through life without carrying something you've held for years. The interesting thing is that as this is happening internally, I keep seeing external reactions as well, because 6 of Wands just showed up. And the moment it did, I got this feeling of people paying attention. Not because you're asking for attention. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because energy changes are noticeable. People notice confidence. People notice peace. People notice when someone stops seeking approval. And some of the same individuals who underestimated you may find themselves looking at you differently. Not because you've become someone else, but because they're finally seeing what was already there. I keep getting this image of somebody walking into a room and realizing that the person they thought they understood has evolved. And honestly, that realization may surprise them more than it surprises you. Because while they're just beginning to notice the change, you've been living it. You've been carrying it. You've been building it quietly. What's interesting is that I don't think everyone is going to understand this new version of you immediately. Some people were comfortable with the old story. Some people preferred the version of Aries that doubted themselves, the version that second-guessed every decision, the version that hesitated, the version that waited for permission. And that's why this energy feels so significant, because permission doesn't seem to be part of the equation anymore. The tower cleared something. Strength stabilized something. The star illuminated something. And 6 of Wands is showing me that the results are becoming visible, not all at once. Not in a way that feels rushed, but enough to know that the ground beneath your feet is different now. And as I continue looking at these cards, I'm noticing another energy approaching the spread. Something connected to opportunity, something connected to expansion. And honestly, Aries, The direction this reading is taking feels even bigger than I originally expected. Because the moment I laid the next cards down, it felt like the landscape of this reading opened up, almost like standing on a hill after walking through a dense forest. The air feels different here, the horizon feels wider, and the first thing catching my attention is Ace of Pentacles. Okay, I have to say, this doesn't feel like luck falling out of the sky. That's not what I'm getting at all. What I'm seeing is an opportunity that seems connected to everything you've already been building behind the scenes. Something tangible, something real. For some of you, this could connect to work. For others, it may connect to finances, a personal project, a new direction, or even a chance that wasn't available before. But what's fascinating is that this opportunity doesn't feel random. It feels like it notices you because of who you've become. I keep hearing the phrase, this version of Aries is ready. Not perfect, not finished, not having every answer, just ready. Ready enough to recognize something valuable when it appears. Ready enough to stop talking themselves out of possibilities. Ready enough to walk towards something instead of questioning whether they deserve it. And honestly, that's a much bigger shift than people realize. Because sometimes opportunities have been around for a while. The difference is that we're finally able to see them. The energy around this Ace of Pentacles feels like a doorway that's been slowly becoming visible, and as I sit with it, another card arrives. Three of Wands. This card immediately changes the scenery. I keep seeing someone looking farther than they used to. Farther than next week. Farther than next month. Farther than the limitations they've been carrying. There is something expanding here. Something reaching beyond familiar territory. You know, Aries, one thing noticing is that your energy doesn't feel trapped anymore. It doesn't feel confined to old circumstances. It doesn't feel attached to places that stopped growing a long time ago. It feels curious. It feels open. It feels willing to explore. And that can be intimidating, because growth often asks us to leave the comfort of certainty. Not certainty that things are good, just certainty because things are familiar. There is a difference. Some people stay in situations for years simply because they know what to expect. But the energy surrounding you doesn't seem interested in standing still. The cards keep nudging forward. The cards keep showing distance. The cards keep showing movement, and that becomes even clearer when the Chariot appears. Okay. Now the energy becomes impossible to ignore, because this card doesn't feel passive. It feels focused. It feels intentional. It feels like someone grabbing hold of the steering wheel instead of sitting in the passenger seat. I keep seeing moments from the past where you may have waited for permission, waited for clarity, waited for somebody else's approval, waited for circumstances to line up perfectly. And now, something feels different. There is less waiting here. There is more deciding, more trusting yourself, more recognizing that not every answer has to arrive before the first step is taken. Honestly, that's where a lot of people get stuck. They think confidence appears before action. But what I'm seeing here is confidence growing because of action. Because movement creates momentum. Momentum creates belief. And belief creates even more movement. That's why this energy feels so alive. Because it's no longer sitting in one place. It's evolving, it's stretching, it's expanding. And the card that keeps pulling my attention back again and again is Queen of Wands. Wow, okay. This feels personal. This feels powerful. This feels like somebody reconnecting with their own presence. Not in an arrogant way, not in a performative way, but in a very authentic way. I keep getting this image of somebody walking into a room without needing to announce themselves. People notice anyway, not because they're trying, not because they're demanding attention, but because there is something different about the way they carry themselves. And Aries, I feel like that's part of what's happening here. The Queen of Wands doesn't seem concerned with convincing anybody. She doesn't seem worried about proving her worth. She already knows it. And honestly, that's the energy that keeps showing up around you. A growing awareness of what you bring to the table. A growing awareness of your talents, your experience, your resilience, your perspective. Things you may have overlooked because they came naturally to you. Things other people may have underestimated because they only saw part of the story. What's interesting is that the more this confidence grows, the more opportunities seem to appear. It's almost like these energies are speaking to each other. The Ace of Pentacles opens a door. The Three of Wands reveals a bigger horizon. The Chariot creates movement. The Queen of Wands reminds you who is walking through the doorway in the first place. And suddenly the future starts feeling less like a mystery and more like an adventure. Not because everything is known. Actually, quite the opposite. Because something exciting is beginning to emerge from the unknown. I keep feeling like some of you are standing much closer to a breakthrough than you realize. Not because of a single event, not because of one lucky moment, but because so many internal shifts have quietly prepared the ground. And as it continues laying cards down, I'm noticing another layer appearing, a layer connected to visibility, a layer connected to recognition, a layer connected to how other people begin responding when they realize the Aries standing in front of them is no longer the same person they thought they knew, because the energy shifts the moment these cards touch the table. Not dramatically, not loudly. It feels more like a sunrise. You don't always notice the exact second darkness begins disappearing. You just look up one day and realize the entire landscape is brighter. That's the feeling surrounding this part of the reading. Six of Wands appears again, but this time it feels different. Earlier, it felt connected to momentum. Now it feels connected to visibility. And honestly, Aries, visibility can be a strange thing. A lot of people think they want it until it arrives, because visibility means people notice, people observe, people compare, people remember. I keep getting this image of someone crossing paths with you after a long period of time, maybe months, maybe years, maybe just enough time for life to create distance. And there is something about that moment that feels significant. Not because of what is said, but because of what is seen. Because the version of you standing there isn't the version they expected. You know, sometimes growth happens slowly enough that we don't recognize it ourselves. But the people who haven't watched the process, they notice immediately. They notice the confidence. They notice the calmness. They notice the way somebody carries themselves. And that's exactly what I'm seeing here. The cards keep showing me people looking twice. Not because you're demanding attention. Actually, that's the interesting part. The energy feels less concerned with being noticed than ever before, and somehow that's making it even more noticeable. The sun just landed across the spread. Okay, I love this, because the moment the sun appeared, everything felt warmer, lighter, clearer. I keep feeling like certain parts of your life are becoming easier to understand, not necessarily easier to navigate, just easier to understand. The confusion isn't holding the same power anymore. The self-doubt isn't speaking as loudly. And because of that, your energy naturally starts expanding. You may even find yourself laughing more, smiling more, feeling more present, feeling more connected to the people and experiences that genuinely matter. And honestly, Aries, I think people underestimate how attractive that energy is. Not attractive in a romantic sense alone. Attractive in every sense. People are naturally drawn toward those who seem comfortable in their own skin. People are naturally drawn toward authenticity. And that's what the sun keeps showing me. Not perfection, authenticity. There's a difference. Perfection creates distance. Authenticity creates connection. And the more I sit with this card, the more I feel like you're becoming increasingly comfortable being exactly who you are. No performance, no unnecessary masks, no trying to become someone else just to fit somebody else's expectations. That feels important, really important, because the next card stepping forward is King of Wands. And honestly, this card walks into the reading like somebody who already knows where they're going. Not because every detail is figured out, not because there are no obstacles ahead, but because they've stopped negotiating with themselves. I keep hearing this phrase, I know what matters now. That's the energy. Simple, direct, powerful. There may have been periods where your focus was scattered, moments where too many opinions were competing for your attention, moments where uncertainty made every decision feel heavier than it needed to be. But the King of Wands doesn't feel scattered at all. This feels like somebody becoming increasingly aligned with their own vision. And that changes the way people interact with you. Because confidence tends to reveal things. It reveals genuine supporters. It reveals hidden admirers. It reveals people who were comfortable only when you doubted yourself. I have to say, some of the reactions showing up around you feel surprising. Not negative, just surprising. Because there are people who may not know how to respond to this version of Aries. They're familiar with older chapters, older patterns, older expectations, and suddenly they're realizing the script has changed. What's fascinating is that judgment arrives right here. The moment I saw it, I immediately thought, oh, because this feels like recognition, not just from others, from yourself. I keep seeing moments where you're looking at your own life from a completely different perspective. Maybe something that once felt like failure now looks like preparation. Maybe something that felt like rejection now looks like redirection. Maybe something that felt unfair now makes more sense than it used to. And that's the thing about growth. Sometimes the external changes arrive after the internal understanding. Judgment feels like someone stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. Seeing connections they couldn't see before. Seeing progress they couldn't appreciate before. And because of that, I feel like there is less urgency to prove anything. Less urgency to explain yourself. less urgency to convince people who already made up their minds. The energy keeps showing me somebody who is becoming more selective about where their attention goes, more selective about what deserves their energy, more selective about who gets access to their world. And oddly enough, that seems to increase your presence even more. Because when people stop chasing validation, they often become magnetic without realizing it. I keep seeing faces from the past surfacing here, not necessarily returning physically. Though for some of you that could happen. What I'm really seeing is recognition. People reconsidering old assumptions, people reevaluating previous judgments, people realizing they may not have understood the full story. And through all of it, Aries, you seem focused on something else entirely, something ahead, something growing, something that feels much larger than a single person's opinion. Because as I continue laying cards down, the energy begins shifting away from recognition and towards something much more tangible, something connected to the future you're actively building, something that feels like the beginning of an entirely new chapter. And honestly, the cards showing up around that chapter are even bigger than I expected. Because the moment these cards arrive, the energy feels less like preparation and more like arrival. Not the kind of arrival where everything suddenly falls into place. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of a new landscape and realizing you've already traveled much farther than you thought. The first card that immediately catches my attention is the Emperor. And honestly, Aries, there is something beautiful about seeing this card return here. Not because it's repeating itself, it's showing up differently. Earlier, it felt like construction. Now it feels like ownership. I keep getting this image of somebody walking through a house they spent years building brick by brick. Not rushing, not doubting, not questioning whether they belong there. Just standing there and realizing, this is mine. Not necessarily a physical house, for some of you it could be. But what I'm really talking about is your life, your confidence, your direction, your identity. The things that nobody else could build for you. There is something about this energy that feels earned. And I think that's why it feels so powerful. Because earned confidence carries a completely different frequency than borrowed confidence. Nobody can take it away. Nobody can argue with it. Nobody can convince you that it doesn't exist because you lived every lesson that created it. The Emperor keeps showing me somebody who understands that now. Somebody who isn't looking outside themselves for confirmation anymore. And right beside it, Ace of Wands appears again. Oh, this is exciting because this doesn't feel like a continuation of the old story. It feels like the beginning of a new one. I keep seeing sparks, ideas, conversations, unexpected opportunities, moments where inspiration suddenly appears out of nowhere. The interesting thing is that this Ace of Wands doesn't seem interested in the past. Not at all. Its attention keeps pulling forward, 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 like something is calling your energy toward unexplored territory. And honestly, Aries, that's where things become really interesting. Because whenever a new chapter begins, there is usually a moment where the future feels bigger than the comfort zone. The cards keep showing me that moment. Not as fear, not as hesitation. More like anticipation. Like standing backstage before stepping into a role you've been preparing for without fully realizing it. And then 10 of Pentacles lands across the spread. Wow. Okay, I have to sit with this for a second. Because this card feels substantial. It feels solid, it feels lasting. Not flashy, not temporary. Solid, I keep seeing roots, foundations. Things that continue growing long after the initial effort. For some of you, this may connect to finances. For others, family, legacy, business, property, long-term goals. But what stands out is the feeling attached to it. This doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel forced. It feels built. Like all those moments that seemed small at the time were quietly contributing to something much larger. You know, sometimes people think breakthroughs arrive like lightning. But what I'm seeing here looks more like a sunrise. The evidence has been gathering for a long time. The results are simply becoming visible. And I think that's why this card feels so meaningful. Because it acknowledges every unseen effort, every difficult choice, every moment when you kept going despite uncertainty. The energy almost feels like life beginning to reflect back everything you've been learning about yourself. And then, the world appears. Okay, Aries, this card changes the atmosphere immediately. Everything suddenly feels wider, bigger, more expansive. I keep seeing doors opening in different directions. Not one path, several. And that's fascinating because earlier in this reading, the energy felt very focused on personal transformation. Now the energy feels focused on possibility. The world keeps showing me someone whose perspective has expanded beyond old limitations, beyond old fears, beyond old definitions of what was possible. And honestly, that might be one of the biggest breakthroughs of all. Not the opportunity itself, not the achievement itself, the willingness to believe that something larger is available. Because once that shift happens internally, everything starts looking different. The cards keep showing me horizons, travel, expansion, new environments, new experiences, new people, not because you're running away from the past, because you're growing beyond it. There is a difference, a very important difference. And as all of this unfolds, the sun appears one more time. The moment it lands, I get this overwhelming sense of warmth, not excitement alone, peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're no longer fighting yourself. The kind of peace that comes from trusting the version of yourself that emerged from all those challenges. I keep feeling like there is a relationship developing between confidence and clarity. The more confidence grows, the clearer everything becomes. The clearer everything becomes, the easier it feels to move forward. And suddenly, decisions that once felt impossible start feeling natural. Natural because you've changed. Natural because you've grown. Natural because you're no longer trying to fit inside a chapter that already ended. Honestly, Aries, that's what makes this reading feel so significant. Not one card, not one opportunity, not one event. It's the way everything seems to be aligning around a version of yourself that is finally ready to take up more space in your own life. And as I sit with these cards, I can't help noticing one final thing. There is still another layer beneath all of this. Something connected to what happens after the breakthrough. Something connected to how this new version of Aries begins interacting with the world around them. And the energy surrounding that feels like an entirely different adventure. And honestly, Aries, more than anything, this reading feels like a reminder of how far you've already come. Not because every question has been answered, not because every piece has fallen perfectly into place, but because you're no longer standing where you once were. There is something different about your energy now, something stronger, something steadier, something that seems ready to explore what comes next instead of holding on to what has already passed. So trust yourself a little more than you used to. Give yourself credit for the growth that happened behind the scenes. And remember, sometimes the biggest breakthroughs begin long before anyone else can see them. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Take care of yourselves. Keep moving forward in your own way, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye, Aries.